Has launched the campaign to try and counter the extremists.
Now speaking out to denounce terror and extremism.
30,000 people formed a human chain in the south this afternoon in the name of peace.
We're asking if religious intolerance is on the rise.
We believe that religious freedom is a fundamental human right.
Giving a message that Islam is a religion of peace.
We must all endeavor to spread love and a sense of community.
In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. May the peace and blessings of Almighty God be upon you. Welcome to this, the 18th episode of Press Point. Today we'll be looking at the horrific and barbaric attacks on innocent women and children which have recently taken place in Gujranwala, Pakistan. We'll go into full details on the facts of this case, but the essence of what we want to look at is why did this attack take place? How has it impacted on the people who have been martyred in this incident, and also how have the Pakistani government responded, and also the international community, how have they responded? So today we're looking at this particular incident of persecution, the Gujranwala attacks. As ever, I'm joined by my beloved brother Farooq Mahmood in the studio.
Assalamu brother Jonathan.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Yes, you're right. We're looking at the Gujranwala attacks, the same city where in 1974, 4 decades back, maximum number of martyrdoms are offered from the Ahmadi Muslim community. The sacrifice of the highest order again is given by Gujranwala, this time the females in the forefront. If you feel you've been affected by this, psychologically, emotionally or physically, and like to share that with us, we'd like to hear from you. Send us your emails to presspoint@mt.tv. You can send us your tweets using the hashtag PressPointMTA. Yet what is common now is government is again silent. It's always silent when it comes to Ahmadis. So please do keep sending us your emails, your tweets, and we'd like to include them on the show. Brother Jonathan.
And in addition to this, we're joined as ever by our beloved brother Khalil Yusuf, who is the Deputy Director of the Ahmadiyya Community Press Desk. In addition, we'll also be joined by Mujibur Rahman. Brother Farooq, if you'd like to introduce some of the key reports and some of the factual situation to the Gujranwala attacks.
Thank you. The details are, Jonathan, very barbaric, horrific details. Let's have a look at those details, the facts we've taken from the Ahmadiyya Muslim community's official press release. 8 p.m. local time on 27th of July, about 3 weeks back, in the area Kachi Pump in Gujranwala, this mob attacked the Ahmadiyya Muslim community's houses, and the allegation was that one Ahmadi youth had defaced a picture of the Khana Kaaba, which is a sacred mosque in Makkah, which of course is absolutely false. And the protest turned very soon violent, and the murderous attacks were being made against the Ahmadis who were in those 8 houses that were burnt afterwards. And those houses were burnt. 2 police vehicles were there with a number of policemen around the area with the mob, and of course doing nothing. At best they were not doing anything, but at worst they were complicit in what was going on. And as a result, the saddest of all the facts is that 3 Ahmadis were martyred. 3 Ahmadi females were martyred. 1 Ahmadi lady who was in her mid-50s, and her granddaughters, Hira 7 and Kainat 8 months old infant, were martyred. At the same time, a lady lost her unborn child in 7 months into a pregnancy. That was a result of what happened. And when the ambulance was coming in again, there were stones pelted at that ambulance, and fire brigade was being stopped. So a lot of things happened, which I think we'll discuss as we go along. Looking at other newspapers have covered widely. This is the Guardian newspaper. This picture speaks 1,000 words, with the mob around the fire where there's Ahmadi houses, furniture is being burnt. People are laughing, taking pictures, videos, and you can also see police within that mob chatting, talking to people, and some policemen don't even bother looking at that. They're turning their faces away. This picture itself is enough for us to understand what police does regularly in that country when it comes to Ahmadis being targeted by angry mobs. Again, the similar picture there on Tribune, International, New York Times, one of the sister newspapers in Pakistan. The same story and the same horrific picture. People are not very affluent, but their furniture is being burnt, the houses are looted, ransacked, and then burnt. And lastly, for the time being, the New York Times also has given this story, and the picture again tells a very sad story of that fateful night of 27th of July. And this house you can see in the background with these black marks are remnants of that smoke which took away the lives of 4 innocent souls. Jonathan.
So Mr. Yusuf, obviously one of the most shocking incidents which have taken place. Before we go in and discuss this in full detail, let's take a look at a video clip which we have, which gives the viewers a bit of an insight into just how severe and grave these attacks were. So let's go to the VT now.
On the night of the 28th and 29th of Ramadan, an angry mob attacked an Ahmadi neighborhood in Gujranwala, Pakistan.
मैं रोला इफ्तार करके मैं मेडिकल स्टोर ते गया ते उथों मैं कंप्यूटर ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਬਾਹਰ ਕੀ ਹੋਇਆ ਤੇ ਤੇਰੇ ਵਿਕਾਸ ਕਦਨ ਨੂੰ ਘੇਰਿਆ ਲੜਕੇ ਮੁੰਡਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਦੇ ਨੇ ਮਹੂਦ ਦਾ ਤਸਵੀਰ ਸੀ ਮੋਬਾਈਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਦਿਖਾਉਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਮੈਂ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਕੀ ਹੋਇਆ ਵਿਕਾਸ ਦੱਸ ਕੀ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਵੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਉਹਨੇ ਗੁੱਸੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਡੀ ਦੀ ਕਿੱਕ ਮਾਰੀ ਏ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਵਾਲਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੂੰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਦੱਸਣਾ ਵਾ ਉਹ ਚਲਾ ਗਿਆ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਕੀ ਹੋਇਆ ਭੈਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸੋ ਕੀ ਵਾਕਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਲੜਕਾ ਬੜੇ ਗੁੱਸੇ ਨਾਲ ਬੋਲਿਆ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਇੰਨੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਤੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਬੋਤਲਾਂ ਤੋੜਨੀਆਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਛੱਡੀਆਂ ਜਲੂਸ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆ ਗਏ ਨੇ ਜਲੂਸ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਦਰਵਾਜ਼ੇ ਫਾਇਰਿੰਗ ਕਰਨੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਛੱਡੀ ਦਰਵਾਜ਼ੇ ਭੰਨਣੇ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਛੱਡੇ ਅੱਗਾਂ ਲਾ ਛੱਡੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੁਕਾਨਾਂ ਸਾੜ ਛੱਡੀਆਂ ਜਨਰੇਟਰ ਸਾੜ ਛੱਡੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਮਕਾਨ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਾੜ ਛੱਡੇ ਨੇ
A 55-year-old woman, Bushra Bibi, and 2 of her granddaughters, Hira, who was 7, and Kainat, who was just 8 months old, were killed. They're buried here right in front of me. Apart from them, a woman who was 7 months into her pregnancy suffered a miscarriage.
ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਵਾਲਦਾ ਸੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਨਾਂ ਸੀ ਬੁਸ਼ਰਾ ਬੇਗਮ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਬੱਚੀ ਬੜੀ ਸੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਉਹਦਾ ਨਾਂ ਸੀ ਹੀਰਾ ਤਬਸਮ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਛੋਟੀ ਬੱਚੀ ਹੈ ਕਾਇਨਾਤ ਤਬਸਮ ਸੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਈ
The mob set fire to Ahmadi houses, vehicles, and a storage building. Apart from the loss of life, 18 Ahmadi homes were damaged in the blaze, and over 100 people were made destitute as a result.
ज़हन में तो यही था कि ये जुलूस निकालेंगे और चले जाएंगे। ये ज़हन में नहीं था कि ये घरों को आग लगा देंगे या ये इतना ज़्यादा नुकसान हमारा करेंगे। फिर हमारा दरवाज़ा तोड़ा, लेकिन मैंने अम्मी ने और मेरी जो दरानी है उन्होंने ज़ोर से दरवाज़े को पकड़ के रखा है और उन्होंने आग लगा दी है। उसके बाद इतना ज़्यादा धुआं था और उस आग की इतनी गर्मी थी, इतनी शदीद गर्मी थी कि फिर बच्चे तो पानी मांगते रहे हैं और उन्हें डालो के गिर गए हैं कमरे में। फिर अम्मी ने कहा कि दरवाज़ा खोलते हैं। जब दरवाज़ा खोला तो उसमें भी उन्होंने अल्फी डाल के उसको भी बंद कर दिया कि ताकि ये बाहर भी ना निकल सके। तो अम्मी ने फिर कहा कि बस अब मेरा आखिरी वक्त आ गया और कलमा पड़ा। छोटी बेटी जो मेरी जो शहीद हुई है, बड़ी बेटी जो 7 साल की थी, उसने कहा कि मामा मैं भी कलमा पढ़ूँ। मैंने कहा हाँ बेटे अब ये आखिरी वक्त है हम पे। उसने भी कलमा पढ़ा। उसके बाद फिर हमें नहीं पता, हम सब बेहोश होकर गिर पड़े हैं।
All of this happened in front of the police, who just stood by and watched and did nothing to prevent it.
ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ 15 ਤੇ ਇਤਲਾਹ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਾਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਰਾ ਹੈ, ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਮਿਹਰਬਾਨੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਮਦਦ ਕਰੋ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ SHO ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਦਰਵਾਜ਼ੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਗਏ ਨੇ। ਫਿਰ SHO ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਫੋਨ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਦਰਵਾਜ਼ੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਏ ਸਨ ਜਲੂਸ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਥਾਣੇ। ਲੇਕਿਨ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਫੌਰਨ ਬਾਅਦ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੇਟੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਾਬਤਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਅੱਬੂ ਜੀ ਕੋਈ ਇੱਥੇ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਾਲਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਇਆ, ਇੱਥੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਉਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਫਾਇਰਿੰਗ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਸਾਡੇ ਦਰਵਾਜ਼ਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੋੜਦੇ ਨੇ ਪਏ, ਬਾਹਰ ਮੀਟਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੋੜਦੇ ਨੇ, ਬਿਜਲੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕੱਟ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ, ਲਿਹਾਜ਼ਾ ਕੋਈ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਾਲਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਇਆ। ਮੈਂ ਫਿਰ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ SHO ਨਾਲ ਰਾਬਤਾ ਕੀਤਾ, ਉਹਨੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਫੋਨ ਅਟੈਂਡ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ, ਕੱਟ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਰਿਹਾ।
ਅਸੀਂ ਨਿਕਲੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਿੱਛੋਂ ਨਾਲ ਦੌੜ ਵੀ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਮਾਰ ਵੀ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਇੱਟਾਂ ਵੀ ਮਾਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਸਪੀਡ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣਾ ਦਿਫਾਅ ਕਰ ਲਈਏ। 2 ਗਲੀਆਂ ਕ੍ਰਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੀ ਗਲੀ 'ਚ ਗਏ ਆ, ਉੱਥੋਂ ਇੱਟ ਇਤਨੀ ਸ਼ਿੱਦਤ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਿ ਮਾਰੀ ਪਿੱਛੋਂ ਕਿ ਮੇਰਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਭਾਈ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਅੱਲਾ ਹਾਫਿਜ਼ ਤੂੰ ਨਿਕਲ ਜਾ, ਮੇਰੇ ਵਾਲਾ ਕੰਮ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਹਿੱਲਿਆ ਜਾਣਾ। ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਮੇਰਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਗਿਰੇਬਾਨ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਾਰਾ ਦਬਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਮੇਰੀਆਂ ਨਾਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਅਜੇ ਤੱਕ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਦਰਦ ਕਰ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉਦੋਂ ਹੀ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਇੰਝ ਲੱਗਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਮੇਰੀ ਹੁਣੀ ਡੈਥ ਹੈ ਇੱਥੇ। ਮੇਰੇ ਵਾਲਦਾ ਦਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਪਿਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਿਹਾ ਗਿਆ ਹੈਗਾ। ਉਹਨੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਆ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਨੂੰ ਨਾ ਮਾਰੋ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਮਾਰੋ ਔਰ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੇਰੀ ਵਾਲਦਾ ਨੂੰ ਨਾ ਮਾਰੋ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮਾਰੋ ਤੂੰ ਔਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੰਝ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨੂੰ ਵੇਖ ਕੇ ਰੋਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅੰਮੀ ਬੜਾ ਰੋ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਮੈਂ ਵੀ ਬੜਾ ਰੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਅੰਮੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਜਾਵੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅੰਮੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਦੀ ਡੈਥ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਲੜਕਾ ਇੱਕ ਉਹਨੇ ਪਿਸਤੌਲ ਨਿਕਾਲਿਆ ਔਰ ਉਹਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਤਾਣ ਲਿਆ ਔਰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਫਾਇਰ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗਾ ਕਿ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਹਟ ਜਾਓ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਗੋਲੀ ਮਾਰ ਦਿਓ ਫਿਰ ਇੱਕ ਲੜਕਾ ਬੋਲਿਆ ਉਹਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੋਲੀ ਨਾ ਦੇਣੇ ਇੱਕ ਸਕਿੰਟ 'ਚ ਮਾਰ ਜਾਣਾ ਜੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਾਰਨਾ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਫਲਾਂ ਚੌਂਕ 'ਚ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਵੋ ਉੱਥੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਪੈਟਰੋਲ ਸੁੱਟ ਕੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਅੱਗ ਲਗਾਓ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਸਾੜ ਕੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਸਾੜ ਕੇ ਮਾਰਨਾ ਇਹ ਬੜਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਸਵਾਬ ਹੈਗਾ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੀ ਬਾਤਾਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਔਰ ਉਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਜਦੋਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਗਿਰਾ ਕੇ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਨਾ ਉੱਥੋਂ 15-20 8-10 ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ ਲੜਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਭਾਗਣਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤਾ 15-20 40-50 ਉੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ 100-150 ਦਾ ਮਜਮਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ ਅਤੇ ਹਰ ਕੋਈ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੀ ਮਾਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਉਹ ਸ਼ੀਆ ਮਾਤਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਨਾ ਹਜ਼ਾਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਤਾਦਾਦ 'ਚ ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੇਰੀ ਕਮਰ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਨੰਗੀ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਸੀ ਔਰ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ 15-20 ਥੱਪੜ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੀ ਰਿਸੀਵ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਅਗਰ ਕੋਈ ਸੋਟੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਮਾਰੀਆਂ ਤਾਂ ਇੰਝ ਹੀ ਇਕੱਠੀ ਰਿਸੀਵ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਸਾ
The attack in Gujranwala was not an isolated incident. Instead, it is part of the continuing process of persecution and human rights abuses of Ahmadis in Pakistan. Since the promulgation of Ordinance 20 and Ahmadi-specific laws in the Pakistan Penal Code, 243 Ahmadis have been killed for their faith. Countless others have suffered violence, abuse, social boycotts, and imprisonment on religious grounds. Over the last several years, the situation has deteriorated rapidly, most markedly evidenced by the terrorist attack on two Ahmadi mosques in Lahore in 2010, in which 86 worshippers were killed. This has led to people throughout Pakistan leaving their homes to find sanctuary abroad or here in Rabwa itself. As events in Gujranwala have shown, until and unless these laws are repealed and the authorities do more to protect the rights of Ahmadis as equal citizens of the state, it appears that things will not be getting better anytime soon.
So, Mr. Yusuf, we've seen video footage of what's taken place, and I think anybody at home, any mother, any child, any husband, any father, any human being with family or anyone at all would feel very shocked by what we've seen. Why did this all happen? What's the background to this? Why did 500 people come forwards and kill 3 women and 1 unborn child? Why did they do it?
There's no good justification for it, and those are horrific images, a horrible story. As you say, it is something that any right-thinking person would find abhorrent. But in Pakistan, that is not the case. And it's not the case because the law legitimizes this level of persecution. The law allows 400 or 500 people to decide that they want to enact what they define as being mob justice. The police officials and others stand by and they don't do anything about it, and this results in large mobs being able to decide how they want to impose justice, what they define as being justice, on innocent individuals. And this is not just in Gujranwala, this is a common occurrence in Pakistan.
Well, you say mob justice. I mean, this mob were going there because they felt that there was some sort of blasphemy which had taken place, and of course the law suggests that blasphemy is an illegal offence. So did the mob kill these children because they felt that blasphemy needs to be killed, or people who commit blasphemy need to be murdered? Is this the reasoning behind the mob?
You know, these mobs are often incited by clerics. The day before the incident, there was a cleric on national television who was talking profanities against the Ahmadi Muslim community. There are other clerics and other groups that incite individuals in order to commit great acts of violence. You saw on the VT there was one individual that was saying that this person should be set on fire because that will give them some great reward. They are hugely misguided about what Islam says, and as a result of that they decide that killing an Ahmadi, regardless of whether it is an 8-month-old child or a 7-year-old or a grandmother or an unborn baby, or looting Ahmadi Muslim shops or setting their homes on fire is all something that is going to give them some kind of divine reward. Well, it isn't. On the other side of it, clerics are using these mobs in order to promote their own political standing in groups, and they use Islam as a way of garnering support for themselves. So there's no connection between Islam and what they're doing here.
But let's say that even if we were to accept that they had acted in some sense in a manner which they thought was Islamic, they've killed three women, 2 young girls, 1 woman and an unborn child. I think even on their terms, that must be classed as a completely barbaric and un-Islamic act. So let's imagine that's the case, that they would accept it's un-Islamic. Have they come forward and apologised? Have you seen the mob or the local community coming forward and saying, you know what, we didn't mean to kill these children and we apologise? Is that, have we seen any
there's not, there's not, and let's just deal with this initial allegation of blasphemy, if you don't mind. There was a young boy who was accused of posting an image on Facebook, and that has been used as a pretext for 400 or 500 people committing these acts of murder and violence, terrorism, theft, looting. First of all, that didn't happen. So that young boy, Aqib Salim, did not engage in any sort of blasphemous conduct. If he did, it is not the role of the mob to enact justice. It is the role of the police, the judiciary, in order to identify an individual who has potentially committed a crime, for them to arrest him, for them to charge him, for them to put him on trial. What happened here was that 400 or 500 people went with police spectating upon this. They didn't focus on this individual. What they did was they attacked houses and shops and businesses belonging to Ahmadi Muslims, wholesale, not one individual. And in this case, they locked up a grandmother and 2 of her granddaughters in their home and set it on fire. They died as a result from asphyxia, from smoke inhalation. So this blasphemous allegation and what actually happened had no connection with each other. It was simply a pretext for them to attack Ahmadi Muslims, as they have done on many, many occasions in Gujranwala.
And the police haven't responded.
Yeah.
I mean, what about after the incident? We now know very clearly that purely and entirely innocent people have died.
Yeah.
Have the police now arrested the perpetrators? Are they now being prosecuted and put through the criminal justice system?
I mean, you would expect that, wouldn't you? You would expect that, having had so much international condemnation on this, that the police would have done something, that politicians would have come out and taken a stand, but they haven't. In fact, the opposite has happened. What we've found is that the police authorities are now focusing on Aqib Salim, this young boy who has allegedly put this photo on Facebook, which, as I said, he didn't do. And now trying to charge him with blasphemy. The individuals that perpetrated this violence have not been arrested or charged. And this is something, if you don't mind me making this very quick point, is endemic with the police service when it comes to Ahmadiyya Muslims. The individuals that had carried out the bombings of 2 mosques in Lahore on the 28th of May 2010 still have not been convicted. Those individuals where there are warrants out for them in order to appear as witnesses, have not been executed. Witnesses are not turning up to court. And in relation to all of the Ahmadiyya Muslims, hundreds of Ahmadiyya Muslims that have been murdered, we've not seen any convictions of any individual who, for those crimes.
So I think quite clearly there's an apparent lack of access to justice and of Islamic justice, perhaps even. But we'll come back to this further with Mujib Rahman, who will be on the telephone with us. But before we go there, then let's go back to Pakistan. We've got more video footage, and let's get a sense of what the aftermath of this attack looked like, and also some interviews from people within the local community within Gujranwala to try to understand this a little bit better. So let's go there now with the VT.
These burnt and blackened homes were someone's heaven. Today, they present the scenario of a hell that someone had to go through. This is the place where humanity died on 27 July 2014. The Kachi Pump area in Gujranwala city of Pakistan, where 3 people were burnt alive. What was their crime? Were they murderers, dacoits, or terrorists? No. Their only crime was They were Ahmadis. It all began with false accusations leveled against an Ahmadi boy for uploading blasphemous pictures on a social networking website. That enraged the local Muslims, who reached the police station to file an FIR against the boy and his family. While they were at the police station, thousands of protesters reached this very area and set these houses on fire. While residents of these houses, they tried to save themselves and their family members by hiding inside. This is a scene no sane human being wants to even dream of. Without verifying rumors of blasphemy, agitated protesters burned houses, looted goods and destroyed furniture. Amidst all this, the Ahmadi families struggled to rescue their relatives trapped in the fire. When the MT International team tried to inquire about the incident, the locals seemed hesitant and reserved.
Deen ki khatir. It was all in the name of religion.
Why for religion?
People protested against the Facebook picture. The actual arguments started in the marketplace.
Word came from police station that do whatever you like, after which the protesters set the houses on fire. No idea from where they came, but they brought hell to this alley. Since then we die every day due to fear. We are clueless.
Did no one help the victims?
The police accompanied the protesters.
A survey of the area and burnt houses is enough to bring tears to even the most strong-hearted person, as the books of children, unfinished food and personal belongings of the victims hint on the simple life and joys of these people. It takes a lifetime to build a house that someone burnt down in seconds. While the Muslims across the world were celebrating Ramadan, the Ahmadi of Gujranwala were being tortured by their own Muslim brothers, and the police could do nothing to save them. Stones were pelted at the ambulances and the firefighters when they tried to rescue those who were stuck in the burning houses. This was the scenario in Gujranwala that very night.
We tried to rescue everyone, but they were partially unconscious. 11 of them survived, but one lady and 2 children later died in the hospital. One FIR has been registered against the boy who uploaded the picture on Facebook, and one FIR has been lodged against 400 to 500 people who set the houses on fire.
FIRs have surely been lodged, but investigation is still in the paperwork stage. Behind me is the road in Gujranwala where 11 Ahmadi families used to live together, celebrating their right to freedom of life and freedom of religion. But this road, this locality, this area now presents only ashes and tragic memories. The question remains, why aren't minorities being protected in Pakistan? When we voiced our concerns to the Punjab Governor Muhammad Sarwar, he said Pakistan is at war against terrorism and extremism.
When I was in United Kingdom, my community and myself were also a minority in there, so we can understand when discrimination takes place against minorities. But one thing international community need to understand, it is not that only the minority communities are being targeted by these terrorist fanatics and extremists. The Muslims are also being killed by these brutal people. So we are trying our best to make sure that minorities' rights are protected, and I want to assure that their rights are equal as our rights, and they will be protected vigorously in our country.
Sadly, this is not the first time Ahmadis have been attacked in Pakistan. In May 2010, 94 people lost their lives when Ahmadiyya mosques were attacked in Lahore. In December 2012, over 100 Ahmadi tombstones were desecrated in Lahore, and more recently, in May 2014, a US-based Pakistani doctor from the Ahmadi community was killed by unidentified gunmen while he was visiting the country to voluntarily help mankind. On 14 August 1947, Pakistan got independence, but the Ahmadi Pakistanis are still struggling for freedom and recognition that even the likes of Nobel Prize winner Dr. Abdul Salam and Sir Zafrullah Khan could not garner, as they were Ahmadis.
Yeah, listening to Chaudhry Sarwar, who's the governor of Punjab, saying they're trying their best to protect minorities. I'm not sure about that, whether it works for Ahmadis in Pakistan. A lot of lip service in that country, but of course we have to keep trying and hope that inshallah one day they will learn. Looking at the Dawn newspaper, they have got the same story covered, but let's go straight to one of the comments. There's plenty of comments out there, but there's one comment in particular which does express the views of many, from somebody with the name Haris, if I can find that here somewhere. Right. Yes, who says, what a lost cause and a medieval place this country has become. Bloodthirsty, murderous mobs with no empathy, objectivity and rational thought, killing innocent women and children to protest against religious offence. The irony is mind-boggling. I'm ashamed to have been born in a country where these bigots form the majority. I'm not sure whether they are in majority, of course, but they're very loud people indeed, and they are trying to turn through bullying tactics the decent civilians into being quiet. But certainly we're hoping they're not in majority. Looking at another tweet there from Salman Farsi, who's addressing the Chief Minister of Punjab, Shehbaz Sharif, who says, would you take notice about Ahmadiyya persecution in Gujranwala too? It's your duty. And perhaps he's referring to one of the recent incidents outside Gujranwala where one of the political rallies was pelted with stones, and Chief Minister took notice of that incident where nobody died, thankfully. But in this case, Ahmadis have been killed in their own homes by a mob, and Chief Minister stays very quiet. Has the message not reached him? We doubt it. Then Jemima Khan, a known name to many people in this country as well as Pakistan, she says that all those in Pakistan rightly protesting what's happening in Gaza, please protest as loudly about the persecution and murder of Ahmadis. Now that sentiment is resonating throughout. We've seen quite widely in the social media where people are expressing their views. Of course, Gaza situation is very sad indeed, and people are being targeted who are very innocent people indeed, and we all condemn that. But what she's saying is, in fact, and a lot of other people are saying the same thing, that if something similar is happening in your own backyard, put your own house in order first, rather than, and because charity begins at home. And clearly that's where we see total silence from the government as well as from the media, which is mainstream media indeed. Meher Tarar says, another name, well-known name on social media, she says, government and people, it's time to show solidarity to Ahmadis, our fellow Pakistanis, who were among the most vocal voices for the creation of Pakistan. Yes, true, but not just vocal voices. Ahmadis took practical steps in creating Pakistan. Even the second Khalif of Ahmadiyyat, Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmood Ahmad himself sent one of his representatives to Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah in 1933 to persuade him to come back, which he later on said that the eloquent persuasion of the Imam left me with no choice but to come back to Pakistan, to India, and take part in the politics there. And one more quick tweet before we move on to the next VT is from Fatir Tahir, who is referring to Huzur's Friday sermon. He says, it is a law of the universe. To achieve great heights, you must give great sacrifices. I think it's most appropriate to now look at and listen to Huzur's Friday sermon, Hazrat Amir al-Mu'mineen, the fifth successor of the Prophet Messiah, salam, the head of the Ahmadi Muslim community, what he had to say following this Gujranwala incident. Let's take a look.
जो फिल्में हैं इस वाक़े की, उनमें भी इन ज़ालिमों के चेहरे से वाज़ेह होता है कि बेहयाई और बेशर्मी की इंतहा हो रही है इनसे, इनके अमल, इनके नारे, इनकी बातें। बहरहाल ये इनकी दुश्मनी की इंतहा है। बल्कि इस वाक़े के बाद 2 दिन की खबर थी कि एक दूसरे इलाके, उसी इलाके के करीब के एक मौलवी ने लोगों को जमा करके ये वादा भी लिया है कि इन अहमदियों के साथ जो इस इलाके के थे, ये तो कुछ भी नहीं किया गया, तुम मेरे से वादा करो कि हम इससे बढ़कर करेंगे। आजकल पाकिस्तान के हर शहर और हर गली में झूठ के बुलंदों पर मुश्तमिल अहमदियत मुखालिफ लिटरेचर इश्तिहार लगाए हुए हैं इन्होंने, सरकारी इमारतों पर भी, हत्ता कि हाई कोर्ट की इमारतों पर भी। बहरहाल इन ज़ालिमों और आगे लगाने वालों के बारे में तो खुदा ताला ने हमें बता दिया कि इनका अंजाम क्या होगा, और साथ ही ईमान लाने वालों को भी इन कुर्बानियों के बदले में इनामात की तसल्ली करवाकर फरमाया कि इन्नल्लज़ीना आमनू व अमिलुस्सालिहात लहुम जन्नातुन तजरी मिन ताहतिहल अन्हार ज़ालिकल फौज़ुल कबीर। लेकिन वो लोग जो ईमान लाए और नेक अमाल बजा लाए, उनके लिए ऐसी जन्नतें हैं जिनके दामन में नहरें बहती हैं, और ये बहुत बड़ी कामयाबी है। दुश्मनों ने तो आगों का सिलसिला शुरू किया और उसकी निगरानी करते रहे कि ये बुझे ना, जैसा कि रिपोर्ट्स में भी जिक्र आता है हमारी कि फायर ब्रिगेड वालों को भी उन्होंने रोक दिया और पत्थर मारने शुरू कर दिए कि आगे नहीं जाना आग बुझाने के लिए। इसी तरह एम्बुलेंस को भी मरीज़ों को निकालने से रोक दिया और खड़े हो गए सामने और सामने नाचते रहे। लेकिन खुदा ताला फरमाता है कि इन मज़लूमों के लिए मैंने ऐसी जन्नत तैयार की हुई है जिसके बाग ऐसे हैं जिनकी शाखें आपस में मिली हुई हैं। हमलावर इस कदर मुश्तिल थे कि उन्होंने मौके पर ज़ख्मियों को उठाने और आग बुझाने के लिए आने वाली हस्पताल की एम्बुलेंस और एक दूसरी एमरजेंसी एम्बुलेंस और फायर ब्रिगेड को भी मौके से भगा दिया, और तमाम शिद्दत पसंद घरों को आग लगाते रहे, जलाते रहे और साथ नाचते भी रहे, जबकि पुलिस की सारी कार्रवाई मौके पर खामोश तमाशाई की तरह खड़ी देखती रही और किसी तरह भी मुश्तिल अफराद को रोकने की कोशिश नहीं की। मीडिया ने भी बड़ी देर के बाद आके उसकी कवरेज शुरू की। वज़ीर आला पंजाब शहबाज शरीफ साहब ने भी इस वाक़े का सुख नोटिस लिया जब शिद्दत पसंद अपना सब काम कर चुके थे। तो ये है इनके जुल्मों की कार्रवाइयों की मुख्तसर दास्तान या हालात, जिनके लिए अल्लाह ताला कहता है कि अगर ये तौबा नहीं करेंगे तो अज़ाब जहन्नम और अज़ाबुल हरीक इनका मुक़द्दर है। अल्लाह ताला अइम्मतुल कुफ्र के पकड़ने के भी जल्द सामान करे और इन आगे लगाने वालों में जो पेश हैं उनकी भी पकड़ के सामान करे। इन शहीदों के दर्जात तो अल्लाह ताला बुलंद करता ही है, इनके लवाहिकीन को भी सब्र और हौसला अता फरमाए, ख़ास तौर पर उन माँ बाप और बहन भाई को जिनकी मासूम बच्चियों और बहनों को उनसे जुदा किया गया है। अल्लाह ताला तमाम मरीज़ों को भी जल्द शिफाए कामिला आजिला अता फरमाए और इनके माली नुकसानात को भी अपने फजल से पूरा फरमाए।
So this takes us to our next part of the show, which is particularly looking at the wider context within which this abuse and persecution takes place. And the key about this type of persecution is quite unique, is it is to some extent institutionalized. It is part of a legal framework which has been thoroughly thought through and allows people within Pakistan to abuse Ahmadi Muslims under the name of the law. So in this section, we want to go into a bit of further detail in order to work out how it is that the law permits mobs such as those in the Gujranwala attack to perpetrate such actions as these. So in this regard, Brother Farooq, I think you found some interesting research online.
Thank you, Brother Jonathan. A tweet has come through in the last 9 minutes, I think, from Rana Mujahid, who shares his personal experience when you talk about larger context. He says, "My school had a common water cooler. I was forbidden to drink water from the glass which other Muslim students would drink from." Then there is an article on TNS, the news on Sunday, by I.A. Rahman, who's the Secretary General of Pakistan Human Rights Commission. And this is, the title is Being Ahmadi. I'll go straight to the last paragraph of that, or the second to last paragraph, which says, after 1974, it was possible to describe Ahmadi killings not only as a religious call, but also a duty enjoined by the state. The sufferings of the Ahmadis are not confined to killings and destruction of property. Rather, whole generations of the young and men and women have been forced to stay imprisoned within their mental recesses. True, but I think more so, Pakistan is suffering because Ahmadis are not being allowed to do what they can do, potentially. And even the brain drain from Pakistan, and the ones who are staying back in Pakistan, even they are not allowed to come forward to play the role they could historically. Al Jazeera has given an article which is, the title is Absence of Justice. And I go straight to a point they've raised regarding the institutionalized persecution of Ahmadis. And they have referred to Mr. Mujibur Rahman, who's an advocate of Supreme Court of Pakistan, a very senior member of the community, very experienced with Ahmadi cases, very high profile cases. If I can have him online now. Assalamu alaikum, Mr. Rahman.
Wa alaikum assalam.
We all welcome you on the show. It's an honor to speak to you once again.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Rahman, this article on Al Jazeera newspaper, there's a bit of noise, I hope you can hear me. There's an article in the newspaper, Al Jazeera, online in-depth feature, which says that, which refers to you saying that this is all happening because of a law that has institutionalized the persecution of Ahmadis. This is the kind of legal framework which sanctions the persecution of Ahmadis, and it is done under the cover of law. This does not happen to any other community in Pakistan. Now, first of all, please explain to us, what do you mean by saying this persecution is institutionalized? And secondly, how are other communities affected? And why do you think only Ahmadis are a unique case in this scenario?
Thank you very much for the question. Mahmood, when you look at the history of intercommunal or sectarian clashes, throughout the world, there are minority groups and majority groups, there are ethnic minorities, there are religious minorities, there are Catholics and Protestants and others. And in every country, we have some kind of clash by the people. But whenever there is a clash and whenever there is a persecution, the state is neutral. The state does not favor the persecuted. The state comes forward to protect the persecuted minority. In this case, the state is not neutral. The state has provided an instrument for the persecution of Pakistan, persecution of Ahmadis in Pakistan. And when persecution does take place, the state stands back and watches. It doesn't protect. That is why I say it is not the same with other communities. I mean, I know that the Christians are being persecuted. There are violations of human rights of Christians and other communities, Shias. But there the state comes forward. The state, there is no law to...
Sorry, I've lost you for a couple of seconds. Yeah. Can you say the last bit again, please? We couldn't hear your last 5 seconds.
You see, there are other communities in Pakistan. Christians are persecuted. Shias are sometimes persecuted. There are attacks by Sunnis against Shias and by Shias against Sunnis. But in those cases, the state becomes neutral and the state comes forward to protect the persecuted minority. In the case of Ahmadis, the state stands back. The state has completely abdicated in favor of the miscreants who violate the rights of Ahmadis. Right. That is why I say it is institutionalized. The law sanctions that. In other cases, the law does not sanction the persecution, it protects. In Ahmadi's case, the law does not protect the minorities, it sanctions their persecution. That is the difference.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Another question about, you mentioned law and constitution in Pakistan. Do you see any inconsistencies or contradictions within the law, not just with the international human rights law, but within Pakistan's own constitutional law?
There are many inconsistencies. First of all, the law which is now being used against Ahmadis, Ordinance 20 or Section 298 C and B itself is in violation of the Constitution itself, which says that every citizen shall have a freedom of faith and freedom of religion to practice, profess and propagate his religion. None of these rights are available. These rights have been taken away by a martial law ordinance. That ordinance was never passed by a parliament. When martial law was lifted, it was given protection by the 8th Amendment. And now the 8th Amendment has also been struck down by the 18th Amendment, but this ordinance stays intact. So the law against Pakistanis is being perpetuated, and there is a contradiction within the law. That there are contradictions within the ordinance.
I think Pakistan... Sorry, I'll let you finish, sorry.
Yes, please go on.
I was going to say, you mentioned the word, the martial law ordinance. I thought Pakistan a democracy. I mean, why would you still follow the law or ordinance set in by a president who was a martial administrator himself? Was it not ever thought about by the parliament?
Yes, you see, we are a democracy, and we have gone through many phases of martial law. You see, when Ziaul-Haq imposed martial law, he was gasping for legitimacy. And in order to appease the extremist clerics, he brought this Ordinance 20 against Ahmadis. And this was not done by an act of parliament, this was done by a martial law ordinance.
Mujib Rahman, thank you very much. We're going to come back shortly to ask some further questions, because I think it's really important to understand the framework within which these abuses take place. To yourself, Mr. Yusuf, does Pakistani law permit mobs to murder children?
In letter, no. In spirit, yes. And let me explain why. As Mujibur Rahman has very kindly and eloquently explained, the legal mechanism within Pakistan institutionalizes the right to persecute. That is the platform from which these mobs and religious clerics find their legitimacy. But there's another stage after that as well, because not only has the state allowed the legislation to exist, persist, and allow to be misused by these clerics, it also enables that to be done by not preventing these acts of violence from taking place, by not using the judiciary and the police in order to arrest breaches of the law, and by not ensuring that people who do commit crimes are sentenced in accordance with the law. I mean, that's required by constitution and by international law.
We've seen the mother of the children who've been killed. Does not the Pakistani law give her the right to know that those people who've killed her children will be punished for this offence? Does she not have that right, not only under God's law, but also under the human laws that should operate within Pakistan?
She absolutely has that right. She has that right under God's law. She has that right under law in Pakistan. She has that right under international law. Pakistan is a signatory to the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Under Article 26 of that, everybody should be subject to the same law. Everybody should be entitled to the protection of the law. And Pakistan has not made any reservations when it ratified that part of the ICCPR. So absolutely she is entitled to that, but the state simply refuses to give it. I mean, I reiterate, more than 4,000 Ahmadi Muslims have been subjected to arrest under these anti-Ahmadiyya laws. Nobody yet has been convicted of the almost 450 killings of Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan since its establishment.
Okay, let's go back to Mujib Rahman now, just to build on some of Mr. Yusuf's points very briefly. If Mr. Rahman is still with us by telephone, Assalamu alaikum. Mr. Rahman, Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me there, Mr. Rahman? Mr. Rahman, we've seen video footage of police outside the burning homes of these innocent people who are turning their backs away from the fires, and they look, from the footage at least, to be entirely unresponsive and not looking to save the lives of those within the buildings and not looking to arrest those who are burning the buildings. Is that type of behaviour by police officials permissible under Pakistani law?
Jonathan, if I may say so, what happened in Gujranwala on the 29th of Ramadan this year was not a mere failure of law enforcement. It was a willful abdication of lawful authority in favor of the miscreant. Only because the miscreants knew that they can get away with it. They had a sense of immunity. What happened there is the result of systematic indoctrination of culture of violence that culture of violence which sanctifies. It was no terrorism, you can see that. These are ordinary street urchins and the boys in the street and the general people. They were not terrorists, they were not armed. It was a blatant riot, arson, murder with no justification.
Yes.
This can only happen with the tacit approval of political government.
So, Mr. Rahman, what does this mean then for the right to a fair trial within Pakistan? Pakistan's a huge country, 200 million Muslims. Is there such thing as the right to a fair trial and due process in Pakistan in light of Gujranwala?
Yeah, the right to due trial, trial and due process, they are all available in paper.
Practice, do you think that in reality Ahmadi Muslims and other minorities, let's say the father and the mother of the children who've been murdered, do you think that they will receive, based on Pakistan's history, based on the police the photographs of the police not responding, based on the sermon of the Khalifa, do you feel that this family and the other families of murdered Ahmadi Muslims are receiving a fair trial?
See, the question is that the police was watching, and if they wanted to stop it, they could stop it. Now, under the law, they are bound to take the FIR, they are bound to investigate. But after the investigation, when it goes to court, we have experienced that the protesters and the mobs, they mob the courts trying the cases, and the courts are brought under pressure. I can cite you a number of cases where in one case in Peshawar High Court, I was appearing in High Court before Justice Osman Ali Shah, and the judgment of the Sessions Court had blanks in it. He asked the judge, what is this? The judge was called to the court. He said, sir, what could I do? There was a mob of 5,000 people outside my court. So that happens when the cases go to the courts. The courts are also brought under pressure. The witnesses are brought under pressure. And the state does nothing about it. There is a tacit approval of state behind this persecution, and the Ahmadis do not have a free access to justice. I say that categorically. Ahmadis do not have a fair trial.
Please, Sab, I think the question for you now, I've seen a tweet here which is very interesting, and probably you can sort of expound on that, from somebody called SKH.
Yeah.
And they say, I saw the video of Gujranwala killings and the criminals are so clearly seen. And is it not visible to Gujranwala police? Now, can that video be used in the court?
It's an interesting word, actually, because criminals assume, when you use the word criminal, you assume that you have done something that is against the law and that society and the judiciary will regard you as having done something wrong. And the very interesting point that Mujibur Rahman Sahib just said now is that these individuals are not categorized as criminals in the first place. And because they're not categorized as criminals in the first place, they're not subject to any judicial sanction. Students of history, who go back to 1933, before the Second World War, will find some incredibly worrying parallels between what's happening to Ahmadi Muslims and other minorities in Pakistan and what happened to the Jews in Germany. At that time, way back in 1933, Jews were forced out of their jobs. They were forced out of the civil service in the same way that Ahmadis now cannot get any kind of promotion in a civil service job in Pakistan. There was an anti-Jew curriculum in schools in the same way that there is an anti-Jew curriculum in schools in Pakistan against Ahmadi Muslims. Passports of Jews were stamped with the letter J. I don't know whether you knew that. They were stamped with the letter J. And Ahmadis, of course, cannot get a passport as a Muslim without renouncing their faith. So the result of what happened then was the genocide of Jews. And that is precisely what is happening to Ahmadis and other minorities here. And there was another, I'll just make one very quick point. There was a point that was made on the VT by one of the ministers that's saying that this doesn't just affect minorities, it affects all Pakistanis. He's absolutely right, because the result of Zia-ul Haq's law is that people are using these laws in order to settle property disputes. It's not just Ahmadis, but large swathes of people in Pakistan are being affected in a very severe way by these laws. So something absolutely has to be done. Thank you for giving me so much time.
How are the government, or pardon me, how are the charities, the non-governmental organisations, the Amnesty Internationals, the Human Rights Watch, or even more importantly, the local Pakistani NGOs, are they stepping forwards and saying that this is grave human rights abuse?
They are, and actually they have to be commended. There are some extremely brave people in Pakistan that are standing up for the rights of Ahmadi Muslims and other minorities. And we've seen this reporter, I can't remember the name of the lady, but it was a wonderful report, VT, that we saw on the programme today. So yes, they are. But
so you've got the local organisations responding. What about the media within Pakistan? Do you have the national media decrying this? Did they respond to Gujranwala and say, we've got to take stock, women and children are being killed, our country is becoming a lawless state? How are the media responding?
Look, they were all late in reporting it. Some of the English media actually has been reasonable in reporting the incidents. The vernacular press, the Urdu press, has not, and you will find that there are lots of reports. I've probably got a couple here among these papers where they absolutely justify what has happened, and some organisations, I will not name them, but some organisations are actively pursuing an anti-Ahmadi agenda in the Gujranwala area, and they're using the media in order to propagate that message, not just the print media but also the television media as well.
But can I sort of add, yes, electronic media I have a problem with. I think they are 24/7 talking about politics and everything else, but when somebody gets killed like this, I don't think enough airtime was given at all. I mean, maybe a couple of channels might have shown a short report, but I think that's all about it, really.
Well, you made the point earlier on, didn't you, about the chief minister? I mean, and these stones that were being thrown at this political party, and he demanded a full report from the Inspector General, and no such thing has been regarded in relation to the murder of 2 children and a woman.
Because they had street power.
Well, there you are. But so there's a huge inconsistency in the way that politicians and the judiciary and the police, the executive.
Can I add something on that? I think the reason why we don't respond back the way they respond back, other people do, is one of those paragraphs from Hazur's Friday sermon in response to Gujranwala attacks. Hazur's given detailed account of what happened, and then Hazur follows by saying that in one of the press releases from Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, the head of Ahmadi Muslim community, Hazur says, "Let it be clear that we Ahmadi Muslims will never undertake any worldly protest, and nor we will ever take to the streets. Our response to all of the sustained persecution that we face is, and will always remain, to bow down before Allah the Almighty and seek His help and mercy." And that's the history of 125 years. In Hazur's Friday sermon, Hazur gave the details of what Khilafat is all about. A few weeks back with in a BBC interview with Catherine Nye, Hazur said about the true Khilafat is where Allah's help is there with them. With every decision Hazur takes, with every step Hazur takes, Allah is with him. And we are so lucky, 125 years, we've never been out on the streets, and 100+ years of Khilafat history bears witness that this is where true Khilafat is, this is where true leadership is. And we still pray and preach peace in the world, and inshallah time will come when all this will end for positive.
I think also for the viewers to have a sense of just how this is really a particular incident, but this is happening in many cases, isn't it, Brother Farooq? And I think that you've got a number of examples of persecution which have been taking place. Is that right? Did you have some?
I can show a few photos if I can, unless we have Mujibur Rahman Sahab online, not yet. There's a photo here which is a banner on a normal street as if the life is going on normally. It says Qadianis, which is a term used for Ahmadis out of hate, that Qadianis are enemies of Islam in Pakistan, and nobody cares about this. It's there. Then another photo I have is in fact one of the stickers.
Which is not true, it's worth saying. That's absolutely not true.
That's right. Thanks for clarifying that. But I think every decent person knows it already. So another one, which is very interesting and a very sad sticker, targeted at young children in schools. And it translates as that if you have any teacher who is a Qadiani, then refuse to be taught by him. And Hazur in his Friday sermon recently mentioned as well that there was a procession against an Ahmadi teacher, and Hazur reminded that the Holy Prophet ﷺ would set prisoners of war free if they would impart their knowledge to non-Muslims. So clearly their teachings are quite the opposite of what Holy Prophet ﷺ taught.
So I think now would be an excellent time to go to another video. What we've decided to do is, in order to really understand this properly, we wanted to speak to some of the wider media, some of the wider commentators within Pakistan. So let's go to a very interesting clip which we've managed to cover in this regard. So let's go there now.
I'm joined now by Raza Ali, a well-known columnist and a blogger. He is a liberal voice of Pakistan's journalism. He has himself been a target of hate because of his honest and sincere expression of his views. He's also been working as an expert for the UN and also the Asian Development Bank. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Rumi. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Mr. Rumi, of course, referring now to the incident in Gujranwala, for example, a very barbaric and a very sad incident. Words fail me to express, of course, what people feel. What does it tell us about the conscience of a society where neighbours take part in the violence, homes of peaceful residents are set ablaze, and innocent children, old lady, unborn baby, they are suffocated to death due to smoke inhalation? Where is that society heading towards?
That is the key question. That society is definitely heading towards a very, a social breakdown. And, it is not limited to the Ahmadiyya community, because if you see daily what has happened in the last 10, 15 years is that this rise of terrorism and violence has, become so common that it has actually desensitized people. The media shows limbs and heads and glass every day. And so it's become a routine affair. And then this looting business, unfortunately, when you don't have a society which is integrated socially, which has a pact with the state to observe the laws and other things, then you see this breakdown. So those scenes were harrowing when they were breaking into the house and looting and plundering the house. But this is not the first time. If you see that at least, I know of at least a dozen incidents where people have been burnt or homes have been attacked, of different groups, using blasphemy as a tool.
Yes.
Blasphemy has become a political tool to assert the will of so-called majority, and I don't know what that majority is, because if that majority comes, assuming hypothetically that if Pakistan is cleansed of all Shias, Ahmadis, Christians, and then these majority sect will start fighting with each other, because this is the reality. Once you take sectarian worldview and sectarian understanding of your society, then you start falling apart.
And what was I think I'm going to ask three questions in one, perhaps. What was police doing when the mob was attacking, looting, burning? What was what was the print media doing? What was electronic media doing? What is happening? One doesn't understand, even at the basic level.
Well,
yes.
Let's face it. The police and the state institutions are radicalized as well. The people who enter police, the people who enter courts, the people who become lawyers are all products of Pakistan's education system, of the mainstream mindset. And that mindset, it's a very carefully crafted mindset. It started in the 70s under Bhutto, but in General Ziaul-Haq's time, it turned into an institutionalized means of hatred and isolation. So these people are radicalized, unfortunately. That's why police does not intervene. Thanas have been burned where crowds have come and burned police stations in south of Punjab, in Sindh, where blasphemy victim, accused are kept. And as regards the print media and electronic media, well, you know better than I do how they report on minorities and how they report on particularly Ahmadis. If you look at the mainstream Urdu newspapers, when I grew up in Pakistan in the 80s, I was a school-going child, and all I learned from the mainstream Urdu papers was that the Ahmadis, or pejoratively the Qadianis, are basically agents of the Jews and the West, and and they're out to destroy Pakistan. And that is, and I only unlearned these things, when I grew up, when I read up, when I met many Ahmadis, and realized that they were just the same as all other Pakistani Muslims. And, but for many people, these prejudices are ingrained. And, nothing can change until we change our education system and our legal system, and we penalize hate speech. And but these prejudices continue. You talk to any ordinary mullah, and in Pakistan, and they will say, "Oh well, the Qadianis are out to destroy Pakistan." And the irony is that the role of Ahmadis in the creation of Pakistan was so prominent. And these are historical facts again hidden from young generations. They don't know who Chaudhry Zafrullah was, or who others were, who even Dr. Salam was. Dr. Salam has been totally ignored, mainly because he's an Ahmadi. What else?
Thank you very much for your time, Mr.
You're welcome.
And as always, you've been very honest in your views, and Allah bless you. All the best.
So that brings us to the end of today's show, which has been episode 18, looking directly at the recent persecution and atrocities which have taken place in Gujranwala. I think a number of issues have been raised, but I think one issue we haven't necessarily covered, which is whether or not this attack was Islamic, because it was Muslims carrying out this attack against other Muslims. And I think on behalf of every Muslim across the world who believes in the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, they can tell you very clearly that any killing of innocent women and children in particular is one of the most heinous and abusive crimes, not only against humanity, but also against Islam itself. So for those who've perpetrated this attack, then they really need to go back to the writings of the Holy Quran and of the teachings of the Holy Prophet, where he talks so strongly about the rights of women and the rights of minorities. So this is all we have time for today. Thank you so much, viewers at home, for joining us. Please tune in next week, next month, which will be episode 19. We'll be coming back to look at current affairs happening around the world through the lens of Islam and how they impact upon Islam. Until then, may the peace and blessings of Almighty God be upon you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
The community has launched the campaign to try and counter the extremists.
Now speaking out to denounce terror and extremism.
30,000 people formed a human chain in the south this afternoon in the name of peace.
We're asking if religious intolerance is on the rise.
We believe that religious freedom is a fundamental human right.
Giving a message that Islam is a religion of peace.
We must all endeavor to spread love and a sense of community.